darkness, there is light, or so they say. So, those of you wondering what this video is about, it is about the incredible story of the Holden Starfire 4, its origin and its eventual demise. So what happened? The story of the Starfire 4 goes back to 1974 with the LH Runner. At that time, Holden had this broad brush approach to their marketing, meaning the smallest car in the fleet was a TA Tirana, the biggest one being the Caprice. So they had a model to cover for everything. The Tirana, courtesy of Brock's win in 1972, was really a performance car. That little Tirana with a 6-cylinder motor, it was become synonymous with performance. So in LH, Holden expanded that further to include 2 V8 motors available to be ordered. These were the 4.2 and the 5-litre motors. You could still have, of course, the 173 and the 202, but Holden, never satisfied and wanting to apply that broad brush approach, introduced the Opel 1.9 litre. Now this is interesting because they had purchased 30-odd thousand of these Opel motors to go to facilitate the 4-car sales. This never eventuated. So Holden still offered that 1.9 litre Opel motor in the LX range. Now what's very interesting, well certainly I consider it interesting, you may not, is the fact that Holden signed off development on the Starfire 4. It wasn't called that at that stage. That come later with marketing. It signed off the development of that local motor because they knew that the Opel motor would end its run, and they also needed a local motor to fulfill its local content rules and regulations. So the 1.9 litre in the LX Tirana started off, but then Holden decided to split it off even further, and that's where the Sunbird was created. So you had the LX Sunbird. Now that still operated the Opel motor, the 1.9 litre Opel motor. And it wasn't until partway through the UC range, in around about September 1978, that the Starfire 4 come to life. Now, the early UC Sunbird still operated the 1.9 litre Opel motor. Now, these were what was left over from the original batch of engines they had produced. The Starfire 4 was unique insofar as it was the first locally developed 4-cylinder engine in Australia. Now, a lot of people oversimplified and say it was just a Holden 6 with 2 cylinders cut off. That's quite a simplistic view of history. It was a bit more deeper than that. So early testing on the Starfire 4, they based it on the 2026, but when they did the bench testing of that, they found that the noise, vibration and harshness of that motor was excessive and certainly beyond what would be acceptable by the motoring public at the time. So then they based it on the 1736. And no, it wasn't just minus the 2 cylinders. That's the oversimplistic view of history. They did a fair bit of retooling for this motor. Now that engine had Starfire rods, it had a Varijet carburetor, it had a 2-in-1 header exhaust. All of those were later seen on the XT5 upgrades or the Blue motor upgrades on VC Commodore. So a fair bit of work went into the development of the Starfire 4. One interesting story was they did consider an alloy design, but they didn't think that that motor, an alloy design, would be suitable, and they scrapped that. And of course, it was cheaper to produce a cast iron motor, as what they did. So the Starfire 4 first saw life with UC Toronto in September 78, and it produced 60 odd kilowatts of power, which was quite comparable to the other four cylinders of the day. Certainly in the UC Sunbird, it had superior acceleration to 180B or the Corona of the time. Where the criticism come about for the Starfire when it was applied to the VC range, but this is interesting. Why did all this happen? And the reason is that the UC Toronto and Sunbird life was completed in 1980. The Toronto finished around about March, and the Sunbird finished a couple of months later, at which point the Commodore 4, as it was known, the VC Commodore 4, not Starfire, was launched. Remember at the very beginning I spoke about that broad brush approach Holden had to its marketing. They wanted something to cover for everything. So with the demise of the UC Sunbird and Toronto, that left a gap in the medium segment, and that's what gave rise to the four-cylinder Commodore. Now, the other reason why they applied the four-cylinder to the Commodore was that the J car, the Chimera, was still 2 years away. It wasn't set to be released until 1982, and that was a total different packaging from what was the traditional Holden medium car of the time. Much more modern the J car was. Anyway, so the Commodore 4 had to fill the void in the interim until the J car arrived. And this is where the criticism really started for the poor old Starfire. And let me just say again that it was never referred to as the Starfire 4 in the VC Commodore. I did tweak with the motor a bit further to make it a bit more smoother, but as a result, it went from 60 kilowatts in UC Sunbird to about 54 kilowatts. And even though the motor was smoother, regrettably, the performance was really below par. Now, there's a very interesting Channel 7 documentary in 1980, The World Around Us. Some of you might recall that program, where Evan Green where he revisited the 1956 Repco Around Australia trial, and he did it in a VC Commodore 4. It is available to watch that program on YouTube, but that VC Commodore went around Australia without any problems at all. So this business about saying, oh, they're unreliable and stuff, that's actually nonsense. The real issue was the fact that the Starfire 4 was asked to haul around the heavier Commodore, and it was a difficult assignment. You really had to wring the performance out of the poor thing, and as a result, fuel economy did suffer. Now, of course, if you're on the open road, and it performed quite well. The Starfire 4 or the Commodore 4 continued to soldier on into the VH range, and again with some additional modifications, such as the inclusion of something called EES or ESS or something like that, something to do with the spark timing. It was a mini computer, Did it produce any extra power? No, but it was a bit smoother running. And in the VH range, you could opt for first time in a Commodore the 5-speed transmission. It was a ball warning unit. So the Starfire motor or the Commodore 4 could be mated to the 5-speed. Not many of them currently exist. You do see the occasional 4-cylinder Commodore with a 4-speed and even a 3-speed Trimatic, but not many of the 5-speeds. So it continued to soldier on in VH range through 1982, and it was quietly withdrawn in 1983 with very little fanfare. It did, however, continue the good old Starfire in the New Zealand market, and it was continued with the VK Commodore up until 1985. So the old Starfire did its job in terms of the market gap it had to fill. Sure, it was some performance concerns in the Commodore, but it was a reliable unit. And strangely enough, Holden, when they started the development, they said one of the parameters was an engine which could easily run to 100,000 without overhaul. Well, the Starfire 4 would easily, with proper servicing, do over 200,000 before an overhaul was required. So there you have it, the story of the Starfire 4. It came in with a whimper and went out with a whimper, but there is significant history about this motor insofar as it was the first locally developed 4-cylinder motor in Australia. Anyway, if you've got any comments to make, feel free to do so. If you want to be negative, just knock yourself out. If you want to be abusive, knock yourself out. I really don't care. But that's the history of the Starfire 4. Okay, we'll chat perhaps another time.